So I know like what is
It's going because we are here for This Week in Higher Ed, guys. We're having too much fun chatting here. All right, so Mike, how's it going?
it's going well. It's going good considering everything that's been going on in the world around us. It is Black History Month, so I think we did want to talk a little more about that, and we also wanted to bring in our guest right from the top because I think our guest is someone you know quite well.
Yes, absolutely. So Eric McDaniel, I have known him for a long time. I'm not going to say how long because it's been a while. We're both getting gray hair, but
Yes.
Eric is a yeah, professor at UT Austin and an amazing scholar who does just very impressive work. I mean, it's interesting because despite the fact that religion plays such a huge role in our political system, there's just not a lot of people out there really focused in on how it's impacting politics. And we're also going to talk about our experiences as faculty of color in higher education, because that's a very important topic and something that I've been talking about over the last few weeks. And so, in any
And then
case,
and Terry, you do have a book coming out this month as well. Is that correct?
exactly. Yes, that's absolutely right. So my book, Radical Empathy, Finding a Path to Bridging Racial Divides, is going to be launched on February 25th. And actually, we won't be having a This Week in Higher Ed that week because we've got a webinar on February 25th at noon that we'll be doing around the book. So everybody
Yeah.
is invited to that, and I'll make sure one of my team gets that link in there
Yeah.
during today's discussion. But in any case, we're on Facebook Live. We're here on Zoom, and so thanks to everybody who is joining us in either place.
Yeah.
And so, Eric, can you just give us a little bit more on your background?
So the way I try to describe my work is there kind of several things that I'm supposed to talk about in polite company. One of them being race, the other one being religion, and I happen to study both of them. So my work focuses on religion and politics, racial politics, specifically Black politics and the role of religion in shaping Black politics. My book, Politics in the Pews, focuses on why some churches choose to be politically engaged and others choose not to. My forthcoming book project with Irfan Narudin at Georgetown and Allison Shortle at Oklahoma. Sorry, I have a hard time saying OU, being here in
Oh,
Texas.
sorry.
You know, is titled The Everyday Crusade, focuses on American religious nationalism. Along with that, I've been doing some work related to the social gospel and prosperity gospel and how that has shaped American politics, but also Black politics.
So some pretty relevant topics we were talking about around the new year when Reverend Warnock was really a success story at that point of intersection you're talking about. So we'd love to get a little bit of your perspective on his impact, and then it sounded like you were both in high demand for Reverend Warnock, and then the Capitol riot happened. So can you walk us through a little bit of what the beginning of your year was like?
So it was interesting. So January 6th was my 45th birthday, and it started off as a great day. I talked to somebody from the Atlanta Constitution Journal about having a minister who wants to be in the congregation every Sunday, wants to be in the pulpit every Sunday while also being in D.C. And it was interesting because the reporter was like, "How are they going to do it? How are they going to do that?" I'm like, "Oh, the reason why the good Lord invented airplanes. I mean, there's a direct flight between Austin and DC. I mean, from Atlanta and DC. This can be pulled off, and that is actually going to be easier now than when he was on the campaign trail. But also, one thing that the report didn't really talk to me about, but was Warnock is a representation of when we think of the Black church and the prophetic tradition. He's openly vocal, taking stances that are seen to be that are controversial or anti-establishment, and this is what was used by his opponent. I mean, it was funny that she said, he isn't Christian enough, or he's pastor of a Black church, right. And you clearly saw that when he was being treated as a radical. But it's funny because the same people who were saying that he's a radical and he's crazy from King Holiday were saying, "Oh, King is so great."
Right.
But if you look at Warnock's message and look at King's message, there really isn't much of a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how my morning started. It was my birthday. I didn't feel like doing much. I took a nap. And then I woke up to an email saying, "Hey, can you talk to us about what's going on at the Capitol?" Come on, at the Capitol. And the world was on fire. That was interesting because in many ways, it brought my two themes of research together. So the morning I was talking about the Black church and religion, which you clearly see in the afternoon, this issue of religious nationalism, specifically Christian nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's some other big flag saying, Christ is my savior, Trump is my president.
Right.
A number of individuals who were openly flashing religious symbols. And also there's this increased rhetoric saying that God had ordained for Donald Trump to be the president of the US.
Right.
This ties into this. So you're seeing this narrative coming into play that really brought my two, with the Warnock election, but then also with the events of January 6th, but also really everything that led to the Trump presidency and the things that have continued on since then. It led into my current project on American religious nationalism.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot to deal with. And thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just want to add, it's interesting because mine and Eric's research agendas are kind of starting to overlap now because my work was on the radical right and how the far right was impacting things like immigration politics and so on. And we saw that. I mean, I've been getting a lot of. Actually, I'm going to do a talk for Harvard in a couple of weeks about the populist radical right and populist far right. And so it's really interesting. And I was doing a talk the other day, and I was saying, well, basically all the things I started studying, when I was a grad student, have now come to the. I was on the fringes of political science, and now it's all in the mainstream. And that's what I was saying about Eric. It's like it's really interesting how we, and I think we should discuss this, Eric, because it's like how interesting that race and religion and all these things that were kind of considered to be on the, very tangential to politics and political science is now coming to the center. And, it's kind of frustrating to me in a sense, but I mean, like I said, it's like all these things that were considered, gender and race and all of that, these are just kind of on the sidelines are now very much front and center.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the way I think about political science or the way I think about academia is that it's predominantly white, male, upper middle class. And if you look at, the stories we tell are about white, upper middle class, particularly and men. And so what ends up happening is the groups that are on the fringes aren't being discussed. But if you want to understand where political change comes from, it doesn't come from the group that's in the middle. It comes from the group that are on the fringes.
Right.
And that's why I've stated, like, any survey we put out should do an oversample of racial minorities, but then also non-college educated whites, because these are the people who are on the periphery of society, and these are the people who are going to make these pushes. Now, while they need to win over those who are in power to get this done, it allows us to see the movement coming and not be shocked and surprised by it. It's political science amazes me to this day, and not just political science, but academia to this day amazes me by how they're so surprised when it comes to things related to race. Scholars of race have been framing these things for centuries. And they're like, "Oh, I just found this interesting correlation." Like, well, we could have told you about that 2 centuries ago. And it's a bit frustrating. It's like we've been shouting this as loud as we can. You wouldn't listen. But I guess the only way for you to believe that this is something is if it's your idea. And this is kind of one of the major headaches that I've had. But hopefully, I guess my hope is that somebody will listen to me. But my fear is you'll get somebody like, "Hey, going up on this," and they'll act like stuff that I've been saying is a brand new idea for them. And this is one of the things that's plagued female scholars, scholars of color, for a long time. That like we told you this 20 years ago.
Mhm.
And now that you want to, you sound like you want to listen. It's like now it's like, oh, I'm gonna pay attention to this. Now I've got a brand new idea. It's like it's not new at all. It's been done before.
Well, one of the things that drives me crazy about our profession, Eric, is, for example, we haven't been doing sampling of Asian or Latino populations until more recently. I mean, and at least Black people were in the picture when we were doing these surveys, but it's like it really when I started really delving into survey data and what I was just like, oh my God, it took our friend Karthik Ramakrishnan to really start getting a focus on South Asians, and and they've been here in California for in other parts of the country forever, and they are anyway. Latino decisions, the work that Karthik's doing on Asian Americans, it's all just starting to work its way into the discussion, really.
Yeah. Well, it does seem like the crossover opportunities are here more now, though, to reach a wider audience. I'd love to hear from both of you on that. Like, what are you noticing in terms of the interest? Maybe it's around the media or around some news stories or things like Black History Month. Maybe beginning with you, Eric, and then I'd love to hear from you on this too, Terri. Like, how has the demand shifted? What kind of stories are people looking for? How has your engagement with broader outlets and media changed in recent months?
So clearly during Black History Month, they want people to speak on things, to speak about various things. But it's clear that when political science really follows what's going on in society, so whenever there's a big racial flare-up, you'll see more stuff being published on race. And so, a colleague of mine, Tasha Philpott, and another colleague, Harvard McClurkin, have studied this. And they've been able to show that you see an increase in Black politics popping up in the three major journals when there's some type of unrest. And it's one of these things of you only pay attention to it when there's spotlight. And this has been really one of the major headaches within academia. Amongst the press, it's really the same way. So, I've been brought on to talk about Black Lives Matter, to talk about these various aspects. But it's interesting that, it's almost like you have to keep talking and talking and talking to the vacuum until somebody decides to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets frustrating when other people are being listened to all the time as experts. But you're only brought in as the expert when it comes to colored people. Because people of color, you're an expert. Anything else you don't know. And, and to be truthful, that's how the discipline treats us. They're like, oh well, I study race. Like, well, no, it's not like I just sit there and study race. I happen to be a political scientist who uses Black people as my test case for looking at these theories. And I think many of the scholars in racial politics have a much broader understanding of the literature than others. And, it's shameful. And, there are several programs where grad students can go through an American politics program and never hear anything about people of color. They can, and almost they never existed. And this is one of the problems that we have to deal with. And, and the journals are contributing.
Yeah, absolutely. Our journal system, which is a very relevant topic right now in higher ed for a variety of reasons. But, part of the problem is gatekeepers. So it's really interesting, the American Political Science Review, which, has been a gatekeeper for years, and you'll very rarely see articles on, basically if you're a scholar of even things like Europe, I had a hard time getting my stuff published outside of, comparative politics journals. But, God forbid you study Europe and race. I have to come back to that New York Times article about how basically Americans are ruining the discussions around Islam and so on in France. I don't know if you saw that, Eric, but in any case, just as to come back to the journal issue though, but yeah, there's these so APSR actually, for the first time has a whole slate of editors who are women. And, this was a radical move for them to choose a slate of editors for all women. But it speaks to the fact that we've had, women and minorities have had such a hard time breaking through to get into these highly placed journals. But to come back to that New York Times article, I was just fascinated because I've been hearing this, I've studied France and Germany, and I bring the issue of race into and racism into the things I work on, like this whole roots. So I have a whole other book I'm working on about the roots of racism that looks at the transatlantic connections. I mean, you have the same problems in France and the UK and Germany as you do here in terms of police violence towards people of color, around over policing of neighborhoods where people of color live, and that this goes back forever, and there have been movies about it there, but the French still, the French white male elites want to tell us, oh, you're just bringing your horrible American approaches to this stuff and you're ruining things.
Yeah. There's been like a new wave of like actual chauvinism, like actual like French white dudes, macho French white dudes, as strange as that may sound, like leading with this this sort of flavor of,
well, yeah, but they're macho, but it's kind of like, oh, you Americans are beating up on us. And, it's more about whine. I feel like it's whining.
Oh yeah, 100%. Well, but there is that new strain of like macho whining that our 45th president was notorious for. But
this idea that white men are under attack. People even looked at that, and you find that if you believe white men are being scrutinized, unfairly scrutinized, anything Trump does, you love. And he's tapped into this idea of victimization on part of white men.
Yeah.
You see this going on not just nationally but globally.
Right. Yeah, to me it dovetails with the whole notion of white fragility, which is an interesting one that you see in a bunch of different dimensions. But one of them is the fragility of like the white alpha male, which Trump was sort of the quintessential example of that power dynamic, and you also see the flaws in it too, like the idea that like the top dog requires the groupthink around him so that his policies aren't questioned. There's no devil's advocate in the room. He's not seeking diversity. He's not seeking dissent. There's a lot to learn from that, but anyway, we got a little more political. It's a political show, so while we're getting while we're getting a little more political, the other thing that I'd love to hear some of your perspective on, Eric, is the role of the Black church in Georgia around the Senate, like the news that the interviews that you would have had more of had the Capitol riot not happened. Can you talk more about the impact of the Black church and other elements to the Georgia races?
Yeah, and it was clearly a sign of mobilizing institutions. And the way I would think about what happened in Georgia is if you take the comparison to the neighboring state, North Carolina, where they had where the state went out of its way to get rid of certain activities, certain voting methods that Blacks use more so than whites, such as Sunday voting, because the Black churches had souls to the polls. So we'll have our service, and then we'll take you to the polls. And there's something about having that organized effort. I think Stacey Abrams and others were able to tap into that, to get these institutions mobilized, to get people out to vote, and to have someone, and to have the pastor of Ebenezer, which is probably, the most historically prominent church in the state because of its history. I mean, you have First African of Savannah, which was the first Black church, the oldest Black church in America. But because of its connection to King, Ebenezer is this very key institution. Furthermore, it's a response to the Trump presidency. It's a response to, it's almost as if Kelly Loeffler was going out of her way to lose the campaign with the things she kept saying. Yeah. It was like, it was basically, I'm just going to offend everybody going down the line.
Right.
And, it became clear as it went on. I think what you have right now, not just in states like Georgia, but other states where there's an issue where the church is like, okay, look, we have to do something. We have not been engaged in activism like we say we are. And so, one thing that I talk about in the book is most churches are not going to be engaged. The vast majority of churches are not going to be politically engaged. It might tell people to go out and vote, but as far as actually putting skin in the game, organizing marches, contacting the public, they're not going to do that. Part of it is an issue of resources. Part of it also is that they don't know what to do. But what they really need are the members to come in and kind of really say, no, this is what we're going to do. And this is what happened throughout the civil rights movement, where you had pastors in leadership roles, but they were in leadership roles because the members said, you will lead this.
Right.
And I think that's what we're getting now is a groundswell of individuals saying, no, we need you present. We need you to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the churches are responding. It's going to be interesting to see, though, that how are you going to reconcile this? Because if you look at Atlanta, where you have a lot of mega churches, the prosperity gospel is very popular. How are they going to reconcile Black Lives Matter and the prosperity gospel? How is someone such as Creflo Dollar going to reconcile Black Lives Matter with his strong support for President Bush? And how are many of them going to reconcile Black Lives Matter with their support for Trump?
Mm-hmm.
And it's been this concern about, okay, what's going to happen? What's the future of the Black church in response to Black Lives Matter, in response to all these other issues? To me, it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah,
I think you're going to see some of these churches, if it's effective, they probably will crumble because a lot of them are based around one particular strong personality, which demonstrate why Trump is attracted to them. But when that personality is gone, what happens? And I expect when that personality is gone for them to kind of cannibalize each other. Also, for there to be problems when their message is out of sync with reality.
Mm-hmm. And do you see other is there now a Warnock lane that's opening up for other candidates in light of his success in Georgia?
I think he has opened things up where he's allowing more of the preachers from the prophetic tradition to find legitimacy. He's clearly taken stances, against the military, against military action, things like that you would expect King to do. And he was being punished for it by Loeffler and saying he wasn't Christian enough, but then you raised the question of what kind of Christian.
Right.
And I think one of the things the nation needs to come to is like, if we say we're a Christian nation, what kind of Christian nation are we?
Right.
Exactly.
And if we are a Christian nation, well, what does it mean to be a Christian nation? And really talking about this,
right,
where you see, President Trump tear gassing a bunch of people just so they can take a picture in front of a church with a Bible, not his Bible, but a Bible.
Right.
It makes you question, like, are we really a Christian nation?
Mm-hmm.
And are we using Christianity as a religion or as a sledgehammer to get people to do certain things? So right now I'm teaching my course on Black religion and Black politics. And we're talking about slavery and how the message of the slave masters was about be obedient. And, you'll be equal under God once you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
But then the response of the slaves, like, yeah, that's not true. So how do you reconcile this? And I think we're coming to a point where it's become very clear that this Christian fundamentalist movement is not really about Christianity; it's about whiteness,
and white power.
That they are so. Yes, it's about So Christine Hobbs DeMay has a book, Jesus and John Wayne. You think of the recent book by Robbie Jones, White Too Long. There are numerous books coming out about this. And, and my research has shown this as well, is that what's going on is it's become explicitly clear that this Christian fundamentalist movement is not about religion.
Right.
It's about race. And it's about race and masculinity. And they're using religion as a way to justify these things.
Yeah.
And And then for the Black church to be the Black church of old, it's going to have to come in and directly confront that. I mean, the reason why the Black church exists is as a confrontation of this. And if the church stays silent, then is it really the Black church anymore?
And I think the other interesting component to this, Eric, is the abortion issue, right? I mean, especially for the Catholic Church, this has become almost a dividing line of saying, you know, abortion at all costs, including supporting Trump. And that's true for many evangelicals as well. But it seems to me that the Catholic Church in particular is heading for a crisis around this because they're losing a lot of parishioners over this issue.
Well, and just jumping in as a lapsed Catholic, lapsed white Catholic too, you know, like there is a long history of social justice among, you know, Jesuits and nuns who were out with the Freedom Riders back in the 60s. And now that history seems to, that's why for me, more as some like kind of a ecumenical sensibility, lapsed Catholic, I actually like seeing Warnock in the Senate because I do feel like there is a moral, there's an ethical center to him and his life story that's founded in the church, and that's why I was maybe hopeful a bit in that if he was successful, are there other candidates like him who may be willing to put toss their hat in the ring? And then maybe the related question is that it does seem to contrast a little bit of what King did, which was more community, or he wasn't running for office. So, and which, you know, we were talking about, Reverend Barber as as sort of maybe a counterpoint there where he's activating against poverty, but not through like a political, an elected position. Any perspective on that?
So in many ways, you can think of Warnock as the evolution of King, of moving it from outsider politics to insider politics. So bringing the prophetic message to Congress or to the Senate, and it's not unusual. So if we think of Reconstruction, many of the earliest Black elected officials, Black senators, Black members of Congress, were ministers. So this is not new. John Lewis was a minister. I think what's critical here about Warnock is that his message is very religious, but also very progressive. And there's been this really difficult time of some strange reason people have made the argument that you can't be progressive and religious at the same time. And this is problematic. And so people try to use the abortion argument. And I was talking to someone last week, and he said, look, there's a difference between being pro-life and pro-birth. And what you see coming out of these groups is they're not really pro-life, they're pro-birth. And because if you're pro-life, that means you want the child to be born, you want the child to be taken care of as it goes forward. No, they just want the child to be born. But then also, if you look at the history of the abortion issue, it really wasn't something that was politicized. It became an issue like, okay, how are we going to mobilize people? Oh, we'll use this issue to mobilize. And it's, in many ways, it's kind of a manufactured crisis in that regard. And I think once you start asking them, okay, look, are you pro-life or pro-birth? You know, because when people make arguments such as justified rape and things like that, like they made, about 8 years ago, you become realize, okay, they care less about life. They only care about birth.
Yeah.
And the thing about some of Warnock is Warnock can come in with clear religious credentials. I mean, Obama had it, Clinton had it. What I find, most comical is you see the image of the Democratic Party being anti-religion when Reagan comes in. But the problem is, before Reagan, you had Jimmy Carter, who was still teaching Sunday school while he was in the White House.
Right.
Reagan had been married several times, wasn't that religious, but they hung on to him. You get George H.W. Bush, who was religious. You get Bill Clinton. You get George W. Bush, who was fairly religious. You get Obama, who's using a lot of religious language. But then they really glom on to Trump, and who really has, when asked anything about religion, can't really answer the question. I mean, when you say 2 Corinthians, that basically says, okay, look, I fell asleep in church a lot. but I know it's second grade. It's not two grade.
Mhm.
So to me, the question becomes, is it really about religion or is it about something else? Just like, the whole being upset about Kaepernick taking a knee. Is it really about the flag?
Right.
And you come to find out, no, it was never about the flag.
Right.
But they're using abortion, using all these other things to kind of to mask what's really going on.
Right.
And one of the things about this is I think what Warnock does is says, look, don't use religion for power. If you use a religion just to maintain power and grow your power, you basically made religion useless.
Mm-hmm.
And you're a heretic in that fashion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you can't ignore the fact that, Jesus went after the Pharisees. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting dilemma. I think we're going to be seeing going forward in politics more generally.
It was fascinating too to see that he had been arrested for protesting in the Capitol, and like it was almost. The good news is it seems like he has his act together, but it reminds me a little bit of the shock you were going through, Eric, on January 6th. It does feel like just being Raphael Warnock on January 6th must have been kind of surreal because but I guess he wasn't in the Senate yet though, right? He had just won the day before, so it was still Loeffler.
Mm-hmm. And, so he had been sworn in yet.
Yeah. But now
because Loeffler still had a vote,
right? And she did switch, right? I recall, like I think after the riot, she wound up certifying, right?
Yeah, so she switched, but she's still accused there of being malfeasance. So she said, "Oh, there's still something wrong." So she still kept the story of voter fraud going. So I want to vote in favor.
Right.
So she tried to have it both ways.
Exactly. Yeah, but I mean, we haven't talked that much about sports yet, so this is going to be my opportunity there. But like, but also like for your WNBA team to mutiny on you.
Yeah.
Like that was really interesting, and that is an interesting. I know it's slightly outside of the church, but the idea of how sports organizations are now leading some of these social movements and are starting to have more of a political impact. I'd love to hear from both of you on that, because I think that's
well, I'm sorry, it is just so hypocritical of the NFL to be out there saying, oh, we're spending millions of dollars for social justice and all this stuff, and then Colin Kaepernick still can't get a job.
Right. Well, I wonder, I mean, he's been out a few years too. I think it's like, because it's not easy to stay relevant as athletically as a football player, so that's why I would be curious, and also the will to train to get that job when you may be closed out anyway. Maybe it's a chip on his shoulder, but also maybe he's just got other things to do. But Eric, I'd love to hear from you a little. We love talking sports, and I sense from your body language that you can engage in this conversation.
The WNBA thing was critical, and I think we talk about the kind of things the NBA did, but the WNBA players had much more to risk.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at their salaries are paltry compared to what's going on in the NBA. Mm-hmm. So if the NBA player, decide to do this, they have enough money to fall back on. There's enough ownership to fall back on. It's not like the 60s where where Jim Brown was, other people were taking kind of a big risk in doing these things. Mm-hmm. But the league's doing it. It's become very clear that they see money. They are going to do what they see money.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of changing topics, but if you think about MTV when it first started off, only black person that could get on MTV was Michael Jackson. Once they realized, hey, there's money in black faces, they pop up.
Yeah. Right.
The WNBA, to me, in many ways, it pictures kind of like at least the way I think things should be carried out, and that's where Black feminist perspective. If you think of the experiences of Black women, they're marginalized and they're gendered because of race, they're marginalized in their race because of their gender, and this also leads to just all kinds of problems, multiplicative problems, that they are aware of what it's like to be at the very bottom. Mm-hmm. And you have this thing, and I think this is something that you see President Biden making very clear. Black women save me. When it comes to the Democratic Party, it's Black women. Like, it's again, my colleague, Dr. Philpott, she's pointed out that the gender gap, once you take Black women out, there's no longer a gender gap. Black women have been so dedicated to the Democratic Party and to many of these social justice issues. So while you may see a male face, it's women who are doing all the work. And so while we talk about all the work of King, we forget about Coretta Scott King and her work. We forget about the Ellen Bakers and the numerous women who sacrifice their time, livelihood to these things accomplished.
Yeah.
Going on with the sports leagues, the NFL. Yeah, I mean, there were too many Black players to say no. Yeah. Same thing with the NBA. Mm-hmm. While the NFL is saying, "Hey, we're all for racial justice," it's hard for a black guy to get a head coaching position. So the Houston Texans hired their Black coach, but it was kind of like, oh well, we can't get anybody else. We'll take you. And the classic complaint about Black coaches is they only get the job when the ship is sinking and it's just god awful. That's when they get a job.
Right.
And then when they right the ship, all of a sudden they're fired and let go. The Detroit Lions to me is the best example. Jim Caldwell letting lights out, but he was pretty good.
Yeah.
And you bring in this guy, you bring in the one coach, Matt Patricia, and it's like, what is wrong with you? You keep him longer than you kept Caldwell. Then you fire him and bring in a guy who's talking about biting kneecaps.
Right.
It's like, can we? So you went from a Black coach who was decent to basically a B-list WWE star. So, and you talk about racial equality. Right. Those are some things that when I look at it, I'm like, okay, this makes sense.
Well, and you go up a level in the NFL, it's even the representation gets worse, which is the other element. Yeah. If you look at ownership and leadership, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, Black coaches can't afford to be mediocre, even though the vast majority of coaches are going to be mediocre because that's just the nature of sports, right? I mean, not everybody's going to be in the Super Bowl every year. And, Mike Tomlin is just lucky that he's been able to hang in there with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've always done well. Yeah. But
it'd be nice to see an unqualified Black head coach get a job, because there's lots of unqualified white head coaches who get jobs. I think that's the part. And like some of them turn out
over and over again, they're unqualified.
Yeah, well, and even I would argue, I'm a Giants fan, and by the way, this is our ESPN version of This Week in Higher Ed, so you're welcome. But I'm a Giants fan, and Joe Judge probably didn't even deserve his chance, but he looks like he turned into a decent coach. Dan Campbell, Matt Patricia, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of these other guys who are getting shots who they take a chance on that guy. Very seldom does a Black coach get that. Take a chance on him. It's more like they've proven themselves. They've been an offensive coordinator. They've paid their dues. It's more the fast track is what seems to be closed off.
And I'd point out that part of the problem is college football here, because there's very few Black college head coaches in football, and so that pipeline is missing. And it's Eric, it's funny because it's the same thing with professors, right? To come back to that, it's like everybody's, where's the pipeline? Well, we aren't we've had to create a pipeline. It's so funny. I was having a discussion the other day about, how do you get a job in higher ed as a Black woman or a woman? And it's like, it's all about networks. And we've finally been able to, that's what I did at UT, right? We had Tasha, we had, Julia. I went out and found, it's like, we have to hire Eric, for God's sake, bring him in. And we were able to bring other people because, I utilized my networks and said, tell me who the good people are, right. And that's, and somebody's like, well, it's too bad we have to use these networks. I'm like, well, but that's the name of the game. And that's, that's how, football coaches, faculty, everything in higher ed is about what networks you have access to. And that's what, whenever I do
just need one person to say you're brilliant.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
You need the right person to say you're brilliant, and it works.
Yeah, right. That's right.
You also need the right person at the top of the network, and particularly if that person is of color. The Tony Dungy family tree is pretty much the main way in which Black head coaches or coordinators have a pathway to a coaching job, because he made a point of doing that. I was happy to see Arian's staff on the Bucs.
I was going to mention that too.
Yeah, even though I was pulling hard for their quarterback and that team to lose. Yes. Their coach and his coaching practices, aside from the fact he can't help but be a white coach in that position. The fact that a white coach has that position to begin with is a problem, but without it being more open. But the fact that then from that point, he, I guess, made it a point. I don't even know. Is it a conscious choice that he's made? That I haven't really dug deeper into what resulted with. I mean, the reality is it resulted in a Super Bowl.
Right.
So it's just, but I thought it was an interesting, while we're in the NFL space, to talk a little bit about. It kind of starts at the top and who gets those top positions, and then they build that culture from the top down.
Well, actually, I think that's a critical component. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah. I know. I was going to say, I think it was, he said Byron Leftwich was a key portion of, like, if Byron Leftwich wasn't available, he may not have taken the job. So he had created like strong connection with Byron Leftwich. And then Todd Bowles, he was coaching the Jets. And that's basically like becoming the captain of the Titanic 3 hours after you hit the iceberg. Yeah. Nothing you do is going to win. You're going to slow the sinking, but the ship is still sinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in any case, I think that, the lesson we're learning is that it's not just, and actually the lesson I tell people is, because we still need those white allies, right? And it's those white allies that open doors and create, they certainly created opportunities for me. All of my mentors in higher ed were mostly, white males who, saw some said that thing you just said, Eric, you're brilliant, let's move you into. And so that's really what it takes. And that's, we're in a time period where that's not going to change very quickly. It's not just about, you're very talented. We're going to, it's like somebody has to recognize that and say, yes, we want this person. We want to pull this person in. Yeah. And, so I think that's an interesting component of this, that we still have to rely on, people like, the coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who says, I'm going to pull in all these people because they're really good. Yeah. And we're going to win a Super Bowl with them, but they just happen to be Black.
Well, and to me, it does tie a little bit to the idea of community policing, and also even, having more Black teachers in K-12. It's like, if the coaches are Black players who are coaching Black players, they're going to be able to connect and talk about shared experiences in a way that a white coach can't. So for me, the most atrocious part of the NFL's race problem is the fact that it's a 70% African-American league. And that to me would justify the staffing choices that Arians is making, even just from almost a utilitarian nature. Like, you want to motivate these players, find people who actually understand what they're going through.
Yeah. And the interesting about the teachers is, we find that the more Black teachers a school has, we've seen that Black students do better, but also white students do better. And there is something about acknowledging, being aware of what we feel like to be marginalized. Yeah. And being aware of the marginalized experience helps. In academia, the places where we've seen, so Michigan is probably the place that's produced the most Black PhDs. But they did this for the most part with, for a while, they only had Haynes Walton. Then they got Vince Hutchins. They had two, so it wasn't like they had, we had 6 Black faculty at one time. And in the time I've been here, we produced 1 Black PhD, or maybe 2. It all depends on whether you're identified as Latino or not. But there's an economist who looked at this and said, Michigan is producing about 1 or 2 Black PhDs per year. We, over the 24-year period, produced 1. UC Berkeley, which has never had a Black faculty member, produced 10. So what are we doing? And there's something about culture that we need to be aware of. There's something that needs to be done. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's like, look, this is a field that's predominantly white, predominantly male, predominantly upper middle class. So they are from they're from the top. They're from the top of the pile, and they have a hard time. They have a hard time understanding what's going on with other people. You can see it in their research, but then you can also see it in how they interact with students. And then you just have those who are just outright just antagonistic towards people of color.
Right.
I have a current colleague, Terri has a former colleague, who anything to deal with race, I mean, just went after them and just tore them apart.
Yeah.
We had a search this year for racial politics, and this individual went digging through the files. We were looking for somebody senior because we want somebody to come in and help train grad students. We went through the files and pulled out somebody who clearly did not fit what we were looking for, but said, well, because of his sexuality, he's clearly into diversity. You can't ignore him because he's white, and forced this down our throat. Now, but eventually, we were able to get out of it because the person came. It's clearly was not a good fit. But the fact that we had to deal with this
Exactly
bothers me. And the same individual will knock certain scholars for not publishing in the right places, and that same individual has not published in those places. So it's this weird, like, what will change the standards. So like, if going back to sports, the knock on Eric McDaniel is, well, he didn't call the plays. Well, there are a lot of people a lot of coordinators who didn't call the plays, who still got jobs. Like you
Right.
keep moving it around, and
Right.
People who studied race realize what happens, you move it around. You disprove one thing, and they move to another thing, and move to another thing.
Right. Right.
And it's just so deeply implanted that you can't get it out. And the people who say that they're allies are allies until they have skin in the game.
Mhm.
It's amazing that people I've seen kind of turn tail when there is no skin in the game. And one of the things I've learned in academia is the more somebody shouts about how liberal they are, the more they shout about how much they campaigned for Obama, the more I know I can't trust them. It's when the was it Amy Cooper in New York thing happened. I'm like, oh, look, she's liberal. She gives all this money to liberals and this, and the other. I was like, oh, I work with a bunch of Amy Coopers. That is not due to me at all. And that's just the problem. That's one of the problems we have is people are allies in word, not necessarily deed. And you need those individuals who are going to be there and they can care less about your race. And who basically know you're a good scholar. Let's work. Let's get these things done. And aren't going to belittle you and say, I had one of my friends, when she was coming out, said one of the faculty members at her institution said, she's real good. She can do real political science.
Oh God.
As if to say studying Black politics wasn't real political science. But
So
that's the world we live in. So this is why I see a lot of people leaving the discipline because they can't take it anymore.
Yeah. And just a couple points there, Eric, that one Black, student we got through the program, I literally grabbed that student when he was an undergrad and said, you're coming and made sure he had everything he needed and told him we would get him a job. And he's now a tenured professor. To come back to Robin's question, if we're producing few Black PhDs, what about tenure? And of course, tenure is a whole other issue. But I think we're finally getting to the point that we have a large enough group of us out here who can support Black PhDs getting tenure, so we can be there to write the letters and make sure that they're getting what they need, and that we're co-authoring that. So there's a lot of things that especially if you're a first generation Black PhD, that you may not know you need to do. But as a professor, I have I co-author with all of my students. That student we had who ended up, the one Black student I co-authored, I made sure he got into a publication. There's all these things you have to do, that if you have to understand how to play the game. And so, that's really important. But, it comes back to Issy's question about, incorporating discussions about race into religious education, because it has a lot to do with representation. And so if we don't have that representation, we aren't able to have an impact on the education system. And I think the way to address it is to have more people of color doing that work.
Very much so. Giving these different perspectives, it's the reaction to the 1619 project is very telling,
Mhm.
because
Exactly.
it's very telling because it says, okay, you still believe this idea of innocence, you've done nothing wrong. It's like we're just telling the story, and it's let's be truthful about it. One thing I can say about South Africa is they've had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, so they've been able to put a lot of it out there. Like, look, this is what happened. America doesn't want that, and I would say 1619 project, the fact that corporations and universities are looking back into their histories and how they dealt with slavery is as close as we're going to get to a Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Mhm.
The fact that Texas school books referring to slaves as indentured servants is problematic. That when Michelle Obama mentioned that the White House is built by slaves, and Bill O'Reilly had to qualify it with, well, they were well fed. What is They're still slaves. If you get time, there's a hilarious YouTube channel called Ask a Slave, and it's a woman who played she worked at a plantation. She played a slave, and she's just recounting the questions that she was asked. It is angst riddled comedy. So it's like The Office. If you like The Office, you're gonna love this because you're like, I can't believe somebody actually asked the question. But this is what you have going on here, and going back to academia, it's kind of the same thinking of just asking really silly questions, not really thinking things through, and just saying, we know academics lack social skills, and it becomes even more apparent when dealing with women and people of color, and it's chasing us out. And those of us who are able to make it, those who are able to make it, usually make it out of spite.
Right.
Our blood
Do you
pressure will
think?
get tenure.
Do you think? Do you think any of the move online is opening up opportunities to connect to, like, sometimes it's a numbers game and there's only a handful of people of color on a particular campus, but if you can start having broader ways to connect to other people who are going through shared similar experiences, has that? Do you think there's some hope there? Have you had any experience with that?
Well, interesting enough, the last semester I had a class of 2,000, and this semester I'm a class of 1,700
Wow.
online. Online is good in terms of the breadth, but you lose the depth.
Mhm.
And so right now I have a class of a dozen that's online, and and I'm asking questions. It's crickets. I in a classroom it might be like that, but it's hard to make that connection because there's something about being in person where you can see certain things about body language
Yep.
that can kind of tip you off, but you can't pick up online. Online is good because you can reach out to a larger group, and in fact, we're working on something right now to reach out to HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions to say, look,
Yeah.
here's what it means to be a political scientist. This is being led by my colleague Terry Chapman, and what we want to do is eventually make it like bring people on campus because you realize if we have you here, we can work with you. A lot of it is those side conversations. It's those with Zoom, everything is so formal, and as
Yeah.
most of the business gets done, most of the ideas that come about those side conversations. So when the panel is over, you say, "Hey, I was thinking about what you said. Let's go grab a drink. Let's sit down and do something." You don't get that.
Yeah.
You don't get that over Zoom, and so it's breadth is good, but depth is good.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I agree that you lose something in translation when I was just talking about this with I'm on the board of a charitable organization, and we have our regular board meetings, but it's like we've lost that element of let's just grab a glass of wine, and so we're actually going to have a meeting.
Although
where
we got to get you into Clubhouse, Terry,
yes, I
because
know.
are you in Clubhouse, Eric?
Clubhouse, I don't. I heard it's only good for those who have the
iPhone.
iPhone.
Right.
I'm Android.
Yeah,
and
I was
so
talking to
they
someone
said
who's
the Android version is horrible.
yeah, I don't think it even exists. I was talking to someone who got an iPhone 4 that he's using just so that because it's just for like audio chats. But what's interesting is it's the closest thing I've gotten to like the informal drop-in nature of conferences. And I am curious whether other platforms are going to, whether it's Clubhouse or others, because I did hear Mark Cuban's launching something called Fireside, which is supposed to be another version of that same format. Things that aren't, it's almost like post-Zoom platforms that can actually build features in that are a little more about those informal connections. The other platform I saw was Wonder, which was kind of interesting. It did some of that stuff like that. But I agree with you. It does feel, your point about the formality of the conversation in particular, maybe it's because we're all sitting staring at a web camera, but it does feel like the artifice of it is kind of foundational to the platform, although it's still convenient. It's super convenient to get that breadth that you're talking about.
Indeed.
Yeah, so I like Zoom because, I don't have to leave my house to go to meetings. But the problem is I don't get the joy I would get out of meetings.
Yeah.
Normally get out of meetings. There's a small talk early on. There's a small talk once you leave.
Yeah.
That is beneficial for meetings, and you don't get that over Zoom.
Yeah.
And it's clear that with students, especially with teaching right now, that getting them to be engaged is really difficult over Zoom because if you're sitting there in your house, if you can't separate home from school.
Yeah.
I'm watching my kids do it. It's difficult because you're just sitting there because you're not leaving your room, and you've been trapped in your room for a year.
Right.
So it's starting to get you.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, to come back to that, we haven't done our COVID check-in, so I guess it's time for that.
Oh, I feel like we need like special music. It's COVID check-in time. Yeah.
So Eric, so I just saw the article about Berkeley. They're having an outbreak, and they actually have the campus police like making sure students stay in their dorms. It's pretty crazy.
Wow.
But Eric, I'm just wondering, what's been the experience in the last few months at UT related to COVID?
So I think so far we've been pretty good. And there was the spring break group that went to Mexico, and then they all came back, and you saw it explode. And there's a lot about why they shouldn't have done it. But something like, look, we couldn't get refunded. I'm like, it's people like, oh, they should have been expelled. That was, a year ago. Thus far, for what I can tell, there haven't been a lot of outbreaks. When I do go on campus, I go on campus twice a week. And when I go, there's a spot to get tested right as I'm walking up. So right at Jester Dorm. I got my first shot last week, and I get my second shot a week from Monday. And so, I've been able to get in and get that done. From what I can tell, for a large university, we've handled it fairly well. I know people who taught classes in person said that students are actually showing up more than they used to because they just need something.
Yeah.
And last semester when I taught my class, it was asynchronous and online and having office hours. Students would just show up to office hours because they were bored out of their mind. They had nothing else going on. And so it was, like, I just left home. So you feel a little bit homesick, but everybody's like, oh, when you get to college, you make new friends. No, you're stuck in your room. You're not stuck in your dorm. You're stuck in your dorm room.
Oh my God.
But from what I can tell now, Austin is a hot spot. Austin is bad, but from what I can tell, UT is doing okay. But as far as the state is not great, and Austin is doing really bad. But I think UT has taken measures to kind of keep anything crazy from happening.
Yeah,
so we haven't had like massive outbreaks like Notre Dame or other places.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that quite a few faculty are able to get vaccinated, so that seems like it will help with a lot of that. And even here in California, there are some places where faculty, like I know have colleagues at UC Irvine who've been able to get vaccinated and so on. So they are, putting people who need it.
And then I was just thinking, it's right around spring break was going off early in some campuses are actually having a break because you have to kind of have a break. And then what are 18 to 22-year-olds going to do when they have a break scheduled?
Well, actually, that's been the opposite. A lot of campuses are canceling spring break this year so they can get through the semester fast and you know, be done and get them off campus.
They moved it up to winter break, at least where I was talking to this UNC Charlotte, but maybe it varies depending on where you are. But I hadn't even thought of that around the spring, because it does feel like we're starting to, more broadly, the numbers are looking better across the country, which is good. Like, at least it does seem like we peaked and we're starting to come down. And that's certainly true here in Brooklyn. Is that also true out by you, Terri?
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously Los Angeles was a hot spot.
Right.
So,
right.
But yeah, certainly here in the Bay Area, I think we're coming down off of that peak we saw, the post-Christmas peak. But everybody's worried now that we'll have the Super Bowl surge.
Exactly.
But in any case, we're actually at 1 o'clock. So that went by very, very fast.
That was fun. That was good conversation. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And Eric, you're reminding me of my old colleagues. Oh gosh, I know exactly who you're talking about. But in any case, I wish you the best. You have my blessings. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was really fun. And yeah, we will be doing this again. We're actually, like I said, please join us for my book launch, but we'll be back. I believe March 10th is our next date, and we'll be having some exciting discussion again. By then, we'll know what happened with the impeachment and all that. So, yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much.
Yes. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.